Welcome to Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, brought to you by Nickel Investigations, the podcast that delves deep into the unsolved mysteries that haunt our province. I'm Jay Nickel, a private investigator with Nickel Investigations, and your host and guide in this journey through the chilling tales that left investigators baffled and communities in search of answers. In each episode, we'll unearth the forgotten stories of Ontario's cold cases, exploring the details, the evidence, and the individuals involved with the eye of a private investigator who specializes in cold case investigations. From the mysterious disappearances to the perplexing murders, our mission is to shine a light in these cases and hopefully bring justice to those who have long awaited closure. But we can't do it alone. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of these enigmatic cases. We'll speak with experts, law enforcement officials, and sometimes even the families of the victims, all in the pursuit of truth. So buckle up and prepare to dive headfirst into the world of unresolved mysteries. Together we'll keep the flame of hope burning for justice, one episode at a time. Thank you for tuning in to the Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast. Let's begin our quest for answers. This episode is brought to you by Nickel Investigations. Thank you for listening, and please consider donating to our GoFundMe that you can link to from our Ontario Cold Cases Facebook page and following us on Patreon so we can continue future investigations. Links to all, including contact information, are included in the write-up. This episode of Ontario Cold Cases, a podcast, is about Donna Awcock. Donna Jean Awcock, 17, was an active and busy teenage girl who loved to babysit and play baseball. 4 decades ago, Donna disappeared after babysitting a group of children and was found murdered on October 13, 1983. Her older sister, Tammy Dennett, is determined to keep her story alive and to bring the killer to justice. It's been 40 years since her life changed. It's crazy to think that because of one hand, it still feels like yesterday, but then you think about 40 years. Who would hold information about something like this for that long? Dennett told CBC News. She believes someone knows something about her sister's murder and says she won't rest until she gets answers. At some point, someone will come forward. I'm hopeful, she said. I don't know how someone is living with themselves. It's terrible. Donna Awcock was babysitting for a neighbor on Cheyenne Avenue, now Oakville Avenue, in Huron Heights in London, Ontario, when she was asked to go get cigarettes from a nearby store. The clerk reported Donna appeared nervous but didn't allow her to use the phone. A search party didn't find her, and hours later she was found on an embankment close to Fanshawe Dam. Her body was found roughly 2 kilometers from her home. The OPP led the investigation, the 5'3", 105-pound teenager being raped and strangled. Ontario Provincial Police say they have interviewed witnesses, followed up on tips, and investigated using various techniques. Over the last 4 decades, the case remains open, and police believe that someone has information that would help point to the person or persons responsible for her murder. Up next, the night that everything changed for the family. October 13th, 1983, Michelle Maynard asked Donna to babysit her kids. Donna agreed and headed over to her apartment. After Michelle headed out, Donna's family could see Donna from their place, which faced Michelle's. They waved to each other across the balcony. Michael Maynard, Michelle's brother, was partying with some friends nearby. Someone later told Tammy that they heard him say to Donna, "I'm going to have my way with you tonight, one way or another." Meanwhile, Michelle had gone to the Town and Country Bar in Dundas Street in the East Village. This bar closed years later and has since reopened under a new name, thereby shedding most of its terrible reputation. However, in its day, the Town and Country, or T&C as locals called it, had a very bad rap. In 1983, the bar was filled with bikers and working-class single men. There were active pool tables and women who were on the hunt for fellows. More than a few drug deals were made in the bathroom. This is where Michelle went to drink. These were her people. Michelle sat at the table with a group, including men she didn't know and a woman named Joanne, who would later explain on the show to catch a killer that she had helped police put together a composite sketch of him. He was described as being in his late 20s or 30s with a slim build and average to tall height, with bushy eyebrows, a clean-shaven face, and sideburns. He may have been driving a light-colored Ford Torino. He was reported to be wearing cowboy boots, faded blue jeans, and a long-sleeved blue shirt. He'd been seen in a couple local bars, and some regulars at the TNC helped to create the composite along with Joanne. She recently put together a new composite that she believes could help find the mystery man. Joanne also said that Michelle was really drunk that night, but Joanne had been drinking as well. The strange guy, whose name no one remembers, offered Michelle a ride home. The unknown loner, who hadn't exchanged so much as a word with anyone else at the table, also happened to have a car parked directly in front of the bar, a car conveniently available to take Michelle home in her drunken state. To secure such a coveted parking spot on a busy night, the stranger would have had to have arrived at the bar much earlier than anyone else, yet when no one ever seemed to take note of the make or model as they saw him pulling away with Michelle. They stopped and got pizza at a place called Originals at 1165 Oxford Street East. This pizzeria, managed by Mike Firth, is no longer in business. The clerk who served them, like the patrons at the bar, Michelle herself, also never noticed anything memorable about the man or his car. Nothing stood out, not then, not now. They drove towards Michelle's apartment, eating pizza in the car. By the time they got back to the Cheyenne apartments, Michelle recalled that there were about 4 pieces left. As they pulled into the apartment complex, they would have turned in off of Huron Street. They pulled into the unlit shared parking lot at the back of 88 Cheyenne. She told the stranger to wait in his car while she went upstairs and got rid of Donna, the babysitter. Presumably, she told him the apartment number, or had he previously been there before? She may have told him to watch for the young blonde woman exiting the building so he would know that it was safe to come upstairs. Michelle was extremely drunk. She took the remaining pizza with her and stumbled up the stairs to her end unit apartment. Donna was awake inside. It was about 2:30 a.m. Michelle's story, which has changed over the years, tells us that they shared the last 4 slices of pizza, her and Donna. At some point, the stranger from the car came upstairs and knocked. Michelle said he wanted some more pizza. Michelle didn't let him in, but told him to wait for her in his car. Then she gave Donna some money and asked her to go buy some cigarettes at the corner store, less than 100 meters away from the apartment. Donna left the building. Whether the stranger or any other person had any contact with Donna over this 100-meter stretch remains a mystery, but it was later confirmed by the store clerk that Donna made it to the shop to purchase the cigarettes. A second witness in the store, one who knew Donna by name, would later describe her as looking terrified and as though she had been crying. When asked if she was all right, Donna just stared blankly at the witness before walking back out into the rain. Back in Michelle's apartment, neither Donna nor the stranger from the bar ever returned. When Donna didn't come back with her smokes, Michelle ended up walking to the store herself to get some. However, she did not seem to remember what happened next. The clerk later said that before Michelle came in for her own cigarettes, Donna had shown up looking red in the face and might have been upset. Donna asked to use the phone and the clerk refused her. Up next, the next morning. This episode is brought to you by Nickel Investigations. Donna's mother got up the next morning and noticed Donna wasn't in her bedroom. Carolyn Awcock assumed that her daughter had simply fallen asleep at Michelle's house. She sent Laura, Donna's sister, across the field and she said, "Go ask Michelle to send Donna home." When Laura got there and knocked, Michelle wouldn't open the door. Through the door, she told Laura that Donna had gone home the night before. Laura came back with the terrible news that Donna was nowhere to be found. The family immediately began to search for her. This was not Donna's normal behavior. First, they called other people that Donna babysat for. They called her friends. Soon they were knocking on doors. If you were in the Cheyenne apartment complex on the morning of October 14th, 1983, you knew that something was going on. Carolyn called the police, and was told that she had to wait 24 hours before reporting her daughter missing. Donna had probably just run away. Knowing that they weren't going to receive any help from law enforcement, the Awcocks and their neighbors started a search for Donna on their own. Tammy remembers a crowd of about 200 people who started to look for Donna as early as 10 a.m. that morning. Only two of the searchers hadn't come back yet, Thomas Kearns and Todd Ireland. Todd was Donna's ex-boyfriend. He'd heard Carolyn Awcock's repeated prescient statements about her daughter. She's up at Fanshawe. She's up at Fanshawe, referring to the nearby conservation area. It was as if Carolyn was making a psychic prediction. Todd got his roommate's dog and set out with Tom to see if they could find Donna. They walked up Clark's Side Road heading north, a stretch of road surrounded by green empty fields and industry. They made their way up to the back entry to the Fanshawe Conservation Area. The breach and perimeter is at the end of Killaley Road, a winding country lane that is really the end of a concession stretching east and west. There are a couple of houses you pass as you head east towards the dam, and as you pass the last house, you are left with a dirt walking path along the top of the ravine. Misstep and you'll go tumbling down towards the Thames River. In October, even after the corn had been cut, there were still no windows on the side of the old farmhouse that would let you see what was happening along that pathway. It was totally isolated. Thomas Kearns and Todd Ireland knew the spot. The kids called it Pecker's Peak. They went there to party and have sex. On any given day, the clearing was where that path ended, served a hodgepodge of purposes, all of which classified as a known vice location by current criminologist standards. An illegal dumping ground, a rendezvous point for extramarital assignations and prostitutes to turn tricks. There is no evidence that Donna, as a perpetual homebody, ever traveled to the site, but the boys who ventured there looking for her claimed that she had been there previously, a reason that drew them to the location as part of their search. It was a perfect place to hide in the bushes and watch teenagers get it on. A veteran homicide investigator told me the voyeurs who do this often have a religious background. They feel shame about their sexual impulses, and that's why they are more comfortable hiding in the shadows, watching others. In the bright sun of daylight, however, Todd was following his roommate's dog and hoping to find something. He wanted to find Donna alive and well. Maybe she was injured. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was dead. The dog started to whine and pull on the leash and dragged them towards a sharp drop-off towards the Thames. Looking down, they saw Donna about 50 feet below the crest of the ravine. She was face down in the brush. Her pants and shoes were removed, leaving her low body bare except for her socks. It looked like someone had rolled her down the hill towards the river, discarded like something used and broken. While the body was face down, the boys recognized Donna's strawberry blonde hair and noticed that her pants were removed. While it looked as though the body had been thrown or rolled down the embankment with the intent of it ending up in the river below, it had become hung up on some brush about halfway down. The trio ran to a nearby farmhouse where the police were called. Both the area residents and the police would later claim the boys simply found Donna's body too fast, and that they must have somehow known where to look, must have somehow been involved. The boys were, for a period, considered strong persons of interest for this very reason, later being cleared as suspects only after providing voluntary DNA samples once the technology became available. While they might not have killed Donna, there are some who still believe that the boys had been counseled as to where to find the body and told to go there before anyone else did. But while the team seemed to find Donna's remains with suspicious swiftness and efficiency, it would be some time before police showed up, with the body recovery site going unguarded and unsecured for hours. Up next, the investigation. Although Todd Ireland called the police about Donna's body around 6 p.m., it took officers 2 hours to secure the scene. First, London Police and Ontario Provincial Police had to fight about jurisdiction. The OPP lost the battle and were stuck with the murder case. The delays, however, meant that Bud and Carolyn Awcock waited until after 2 a.m. on October 15th to get confirmation that the body found there belonged to their precious daughter. Officials asked the Awcocks to come to the hospital and identify Donna, so the exhausted couple mournfully got in their car and drove to the morgue. Despite many initial oversights in the investigation, consider the time elapsed and challenges of the outdoor scene and inclement weather, the forensic work done in Donna's case was truly exceptional, even by today's standards. It's unfortunate that few other areas of the investigation managed to show the same level of commitment or diligence. For one, no neighborhood canvass was conducted to determine who might have seen Donna along that fateful 100-meter walk back to Michelle's apartment, or who might have been lurking in the parking lot when she exited the store. Had proper neighborhood interviews been conducted, investigators might have realized that the man living across the hall from Michelle and who was drinking with Michelle's delinquent brother Michael that same night was a fugitive sex killer from Tennessee on the FBI's most wanted list. Operating under the alias Joe Tripp, Michelle's neighbor was actually Joseph Alvin Shepard, on the run since breaking out of a county jail in 1978, where he was being held on murder charges for the sex slaying of 2 teenage girls. It wasn't until the premiere episode of the NBC series Unsolved Mysteries in 1988 that a Cheyenne Apartments resident recognized him and called authorities. Initially a promising lead, Shepard was later extradited back to Tennessee by U.S. Marshals, where a DNA sample eventually ruled him out as a suspect in Donna's death. Donna had been strangled. She'd been beaten about the head and raped. Her shirt had been pulled up, exposing her breasts. Her face had been battered, and she had been manually strangled, either during or immediately following the act of forced intercourse. Donna's body had come to rest in an awkward position, with one arm tucked beneath her torso, one arm at her side, and her legs together. Her shoes were removed, but her ankle socks remained intact. Her blue running shoes, Bullet brand, were missing, as were the house keys she wore around her neck on a lanyard and her new pack of cigarettes. Once Donna's body was turned over, investigators saw something truly startling. Still protruding from Donna's mouth was an orange synthetic object the crime scene investigators soon realized was a plastic Halloween bag, presumably designed for use by a smaller child for trick-or-treating. With Halloween just over 2 weeks away, and given that the killer had access to a car, one needs to ask a simple question. What grown man would have a children's trick-or-treat bag stowed in his vehicle 2 weeks before Halloween? It remains, along with the crime scene behaviors, one of the best non-biological leads in the case. The plastic bag stuffed in her throat sported a partial fingerprint that could not be run through the national database since it wasn't complete. It has not since been re-examined with new fingerprint technology. It has never been run through the system to see if there's a match. Michelle Maynard spoke to police on October 14, 1983. Then she disappeared for about a week and was not interviewed again until she returned. No one knows where she went or why. Michelle claimed that she had no recollection of the man who brought her home. Nonetheless, she was made to meet with a police sketch artist, the identikit having been shelved in favor of hand-drawn facsimile in this case, in hopes that it might help identify and locate the stranger as a lone person of interest. Michelle, in turn, played a game in which she provided an elaborate description to the sketch artist, a description she would later confirm she just made up as she went along, since she'd been too blackout drunk to remember what the stranger actually looked like. The same sketch artist also met with Joanne, the completely sober TNC regular, who was at the same table that night and who had a very clear recollection of the man. The descriptions, one genuine, one fabricated, were so dramatically different that investigators decided to create a mashup drawing with features taken at random from the contradictory descriptions. Michelle's description of the hair would be used, Joanne's description of the nose would be used, and so on. The process used in determining whose description of what identifying features would be consolidated in the final version was never clarified, and the OPP have refused comment on this otherwise unheard of tactic of going public with a mashup composite. Not surprisingly, when the image was disseminated on an accurate likeness of the mystery man in an attempt to solicit tips, Nothing materialized. The sketch was not of the mystery man or even of a real person. It was an artistic alloy drawn from divergent descriptions, one of which was later admitted to be pure fiction. Michelle was given a polygraph test. They wanted to see if she was lying or hiding anything about Donna's murder. She passed the test. However, the Awcock family is still very suspicious of her, and particularly her brother. In spite of the physical evidence at the crime scene, a semen sample, a partial fingerprint, and some fairly clear discriminators in terms of disorganized offenders' characteristics that include stealing the cigarettes Donna brought at the store, the case went cold relatively quickly. Up next, the suspects. This episode is brought to you by Nickel Investigations. What makes Michael Maynard suspicious is his friendship with the guy he was partying with the night Donna was killed, Joe Tripp. It turns out in 1978, Joe Tripp had escaped with 2 other inmates from the Bradley County Jail in Tennessee, where he was serving time for killing Kathy Clowers, age 14, and Roxanne Woodson, age 15, both from Monroe County. His real name was Joe Shepard. He'd come to London where his sister was renting an apartment in the same building as the Maynards. He spent a lot of time at the Cheyenne Apartments and probably knew Donna. In 1988, the Joe Shepard case was featured on the first ever episode of Unsolved Mysteries. A London resident saw the show, recognized Joe, and alerted authorities. He was caught and shipped back to Tennessee, where he was incarcerated. Till the day he died, he maintained that he was innocent. He was sentenced to life in prison. His DNA was tested in relation to Donna's case in 1995, and they cleared him as a suspect. He died in prison in 2010 at the age of 57. The boys who found Donna's body were also ruled out as suspects. Her ex-boyfriend Todd Ireland voluntarily provided his DNA, which was tested against evidence found at the crime scene. He was cleared of all suspicion and is friends with Tammy Dennett on Facebook. The recovery site of Donna's body, near a local lover's lane, but with crime scene behaviors that suggest the killer is improperly socialized and thus would have normally frequented such a location with a consensual participant, tells us a great deal about his mindset. It tells us that Donna's murderer, like so many other offenders in London and elsewhere who instinctively bring victims to known vice locations, was likely a sociophilic accustomed to watching others at these same types of areas. The decision to transport Donna to such a spot instead of a more secluded and anonymous site suggests that this location offered some specific intrinsic value to the killer. There are also some clear consistencies between the Awcock murder and the slaying of Jacqueline Dunleavy 15 years earlier, based solely on surface disposal method at or near known vice locations that reflect preparatory paraphilias that include both exhibitionism and peeping Tom activity. In simplest terms, anytime you have a killer with a car and who has the luxury of making decisions about where to transport a victim, these types of locations need to be understood as never being random. Murderers who target these locations are obsessed with media coverage of their crimes and are also very much aware of the behaviors of other murderers, many of whom they seek to emulate. For this same reason, the other connections between the Awcock slaying and either earlier London murders seem artificially engineered. Someone was copying other killers. In the long term, these offenders do not simply stop after one murder. They cannot stop. Up next, my summary. This episode is brought to you by Nickel Investigations. The most common question that arises is why, with offender DNA being on the file, these offenders have not been matched to later crime scenes. Murderers like those of Donna Awcock don't just stop. Part of the answer rests in the fact that despite many missteps in some of these investigations, police in London and region, the London PD in particular, were rather prescient in recognizing the potential future value of items containing biological evidence, with everything from cigarette butts to bloody sheets and outerwear being preserved and properly stored for decades. The same practice has unfortunately not been regularly applied across Canada over the last 50 years, a deficit which has ensured problems with respect to DNA sample consistency. Another limitation is design of the National DNA Databank itself, which, as seen in some unusual cases internationally, is not foolproof. As mathematically certain as DNA can be, the human component will always present some degree of risk for error. From contamination to lab errors, they do happen. Granted, according to some probability experts, an error rate as a result of laboratory contamination of around only 1 to 3% globally. But when an error is made, it can prove costly, not just with respect to false positives that result in wrongful convictions and suspect misidentifications, but also, just as importantly, with respect to false negatives, with offender hits being missed entirely. If a false negative can occur when DNA is being compared using what we could refer to as an apples-to-apples test, a single crime scene sample to a single offender sample, then it raises serious questions about the prevalence of false negatives when the comparisons are being made while tests are being conducted on autopilot without any direct oversight. In Canada, the National DNA Databank is made up of two separate databases that operate in this fashion. The Crime Scene Index contains samples obtained from blood, semen, hair, and other biological materials left by offenders at crime scenes, while the Convicted Offender Index reflects samples obtained from perpetrators following their conviction for any violent crime. Both databases unite to form what is known as a Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, which runs an automated test every 24 hours to compare offender samples to crime scene samples, as well as to compare separate crime scene samples in an effort to link multiple offenses to a common perpetrator. As of 2014, there were over 300,000 convicted offender DNA samples on file in CODIS, with at least 500 new samples coming in every week. Murderers, rapists, child molesters, burglars, peeping toms, and run-of-the-mill violent criminals. But automated matches between offender and crime scene samples, known as cold hits, with respect to historical and unsolved homicides, simply aren't being made to the degree which one would expect, nor in the number that other peer nations with similar databases are making them. The question is simple. Presuming the system is operating as it should, how can repeated false negatives be recurring on a daily basis? The National DNA Databank has assisted with a total of just over 2,000 murder investigations by either clearing or implicating suspects on specifically requested one-to-one comparisons. Why the rest aren't being matched using the automated system is anyone's guess. It suggests that for the murders of girls like Jacqueline Dunleavy, employing highly specific and sadistic methods of killing that are indicative of significant future offending, not to be matched to any other crime scenes, one would have to believe that at no time since 2001 has a killer been arrested for any violent or sexual offense, nor has he ever served prison time for any similar offenses committed prior to them. A number of highly specific murders that suggest their killers should have been caught for at least some other DNA qualifying crime since committing these murders, not even necessarily another sex killing, and should therefore be in the Convicted Offender Index. Yet it seems they are not. When police brass are asked on the anniversaries of these still unsolved murders why a cold hit still hasn't been made in spite of so many offender DNA samples now being in the databank, it's always the same list of suppositions. The killer moved out of the country, the killer died, or the killer simply stopped killing cold turkey. Maybe in one or two cases, but when looking at the vast numbers of offenders on file with CODIS and the corresponding numbers of open unsolved sexual homicides with paraphilic serial indicators and where DNA was left at the scene, it simply doesn't compute. In Canada, however, the biological privacy of killer trumps the need to catch them. While on the surface this would seem to be logical and equitable, consider that a hit of any kind doesn't mean the DNA donor is immediately jailed. A thorough validation process must first occur to ensure it's not a false positive. Further, because DNA samples are today taken and stored under conditions that are greatly improved over the databank's early years, it's unclear whether some of these early samples, either crime scene or offender samples, have degraded or been compromised, thus being artificially screened out under Canada's stringency standards, when in fact a manual comparison would actually confirm a match. Most importantly, recent research has confirmed that DNA changes as people age. In other words, a sample taken from a killer's blood, semen, or hair from a murder scene 40 years ago and then compared to a sample from that same killer taken today would likely not result in an automated CODIS match, at least not based on how the system is currently programmed. The current DNA system in Canada is far from the silver bullet people think it is. Up next, today in Donna's memory. In 2010, Tammy started a group called Donna's Angels to remember her sister and bring something positive out of her murder. Each year, she picks a family of 5 to help out over the holidays. She raises money to buy presents for all the kids based on a wish list they provide and gives something to the parents too. Then they buy the family all the fixings for a Christmas dinner. Finally, they include a $50 gift card for No Frills so the family can buy groceries in the new year. With files from the CBC, Vanessa Brown's The Forest City Killer, and Michael Arnfelt, his book Murder City, The Untold Story of Canada's Serial Killer. This episode's been brought to you by Nickel Investigations. Please consider following Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, on Patreon, and subscribing. Thank you very much. Good day.